"Give me the cash, now," a corrupt cop barked, pointing at the roadside seller. The man stayed calm, hands raised, but the crowd could feel the tension. Everyone thought this would be an easy shakedown, just another victim. But as the cop's eyes narrowed, he had no idea what was coming. In that single moment, the seller's hidden identity would turn the streets upside down, and the cop would never recover. Before we dive in, comment your city or town below. I want to see how far this story travels. If you believe justice always finds its way, hit like and subscribe, because truth can't be silenced. The morning streets were buzzing, vendors shouting prices, cars honking, and pedestrians weaving between the chaos. At the corner of Fifth Avenue, a small roadside stall displayed neatly arranged fruits and vegetables. The owner, a composed black man in his late 30s, carefully stacked the produce while greeting regular customers with a warm smile. Life for him was simple, honest, and exhausting. Every day was a struggle, but he took pride in his work. Across the street, a police cruiser idled, the engine humming. Two cops sat inside, watching the crowd with predatory eyes. One of them, known among his peers for bending rules and exploiting the vulnerable, spotted the roadside seller. A smirk formed on his face. "Easy cash," he muttered. Without hesitation, he stepped out, swagger in his walk, hand resting near his belt as if he already owned the place. He approached the stall, blocking half the street. "Hey, you! Step aside," the cop barked. The vendor looked up calmly, recognizing the threat but not panicking. "Good morning, officers. Can I help you?" he asked politely. The cop laughed, a harsh, cynical sound. "Help me? You're going to pay for protection. That's how this works." The vendor's calm demeanor didn't falter, but the tension was electric. Shoppers paused, some stepping back to avoid being caught in what was about to unfold. The cop leaned closer, lowering his voice but making sure everyone could hear. "I said give me the cash. Now. Or we'll find violations and fines you can't pay." For a moment, the street seemed to hold its breath. The vendor raised a single hand, still calm, his other hand resting casually near his waist. "I don't have anything to hide," he said softly, yet firmly. The cop laughed again, louder this time, drawing more eyes. "Don't play smart with me. I run this street. You pay, or I'll shut you down." Passers-by started whispering. Some pulled out their phones, sensing the drama. Children stared wide-eyed, mothers grabbed their carts a little tighter, and the vendor's regular customers exchanged worried glances. It looked like a classic case of corruption meeting innocence, a strong-arm cop and a helpless seller. But the man behind the stall was no ordinary seller. Inside, he remained calm, almost unreadable. He'd spent years training for situations exactly like this, moments where he needed to blend in, observe, and wait for the right second to act. The cop had no idea he was dealing with someone who could flip the entire situation on its head in a heartbeat. "Where's the money?" the cop demanded again, now stepping even closer, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Sweat started forming at his temples, not from fear, but frustration. He was used to obedience, used to bending people, used to getting what he wanted. This calm, polite defiance was not in his experience. The tension escalated further as a few street vendors moved their stalls away to give room, and curious onlookers started gathering, sensing a confrontation. Every eye on the street was locked on the stall. The vendor's posture didn't change. His gaze met the cop's, steady and unflinching, almost challenging him without a single word. For the first time, the cop hesitated, sensing something unfamiliar. Yet, arrogance won over caution. "Listen, you're making this hard. Just hand it over before I make you regret it." The vendor slowly reached into his pocket, but not for cash. Every movement was calculated, precise, and intentional. The street held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Little did anyone know, the moment that was about to unfold would shock the crowd, expose corruption, and leave the cop humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood. The cop's eyes narrowed, frustration simmering beneath his uniform. He had never encountered a vendor who didn't immediately cave under pressure. The street crowd whispered and shuffled, sensing the growing intensity. Every step the officer took toward the stall seemed to tighten the invisible grip of tension over the scene. "Don't make me repeat myself," he barked, his voice echoing off the nearby buildings. His hand twitched near his belt, a subtle threat that the crowd immediately recognized. Yet the vendor didn't flinch. Instead, he maintained his composure, scanning the street casually, as if assessing the crowd and the cop at the same time. Some of the nearby vendors moved slightly closer, curious but cautious. Phones in hand, they began recording, instinctively feeling the injustice of what was happening. The cop noticed the phones and sneered. "What are you all staring at? Move along." But the crowd didn't move. Their silence felt like judgment, like the weight of an entire community watching. The vendor, keeping his voice calm, said, "Officer, I want to cooperate, but I don't have any money for protection. Maybe there's a better way to resolve this?" His words were measured, polite, yet every word seemed to prick at the cop's ego. The officer's smirk faded slightly. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "Listen, I don't care how polite you are. You pay, or I'll make life miserable for you. No one here will help you." A murmur ran through the crowd. The tension was palpable. But the vendor's calm gaze never wavered. Slowly, he began gesturing subtly with his hands, pointing to a nearby alley. To an ordinary observer, it seemed innocuous, casual movements of someone organizing his stall. But the cop didn't notice the small cues. Behind the stall, hidden from the crowd, a small earpiece picked up the cop's every word. A silent signal had already been sent to authorities. The vendor's eyes flicked briefly to the corner, where a marked vehicle approached discreetly. Within moments, officers trained for precise interventions would arrive, but the corrupt cop had no idea his moment of dominance was about to collapse. Still, he pressed on, oblivious. "You think I'm bluffing?" The cop's tone now carried a sharp edge, anger bubbling into aggression. "I run this block. You pay me now, or—" He paused, trying to intimidate further, but even he noticed the crowd holding its collective breath. Something was off. This wasn't like the usual compliance he was used to. The vendor continued speaking, his voice steady. "I've never had a problem with law enforcement before. Surely, we can settle this peacefully." His calmness only fueled the cop's frustration. He wanted obedience, fear, anything but this poised, confident defiance. At that moment, a young boy nearby whispered to his mother, "Why isn't he giving the money?" The word spread silently through the crowd, heightening anticipation. People leaned in, sensing that this confrontation would escalate into something extraordinary. Then, without warning, the vendor made a subtle movement, signaling to the approaching undercover unit. The cop stiffened for just a fraction of a second, sensing something unexpected. His instincts screamed that control was slipping, but he couldn't pinpoint why. The street held its breath. The vendor, calm and collected, continued stacking his produce, making it appear like a routine morning. Yet every eye in the crowd was fixed on him and the cop, waiting for the moment when the true power dynamics would be revealed. And in that moment, the corrupt cop, demanding protection money as he had for years, would soon realize that he had no idea who he was dealing with, and the consequences of his arrogance were about to unfold in front of everyone. The cop's hand hovered near his belt, and the once confident swagger was now edged with impatience. He had demanded protection money countless times before, and every time, the target had quickly handed over cash, bowing to authority. But this vendor, this roadside seller, was different. His calm, unwavering gaze struck at the cop's ego like a sharp knife. "Enough games," the officer growled. "Give me the money. Now." His voice carried authority, but his eyes betrayed frustration. He was used to control, and now, control was slipping from his grasp. The vendor raised both hands, still calm. "Officer, I've told you, I don't have money for protection. Maybe there's another way we can settle this?" The words were soft, polite, and deliberate. But the subtle defiance within them ignited a spark of anger in the officer. "Don't lecture me," the cop snapped, stepping closer, his badge glinting in the morning sun. "I could shut you down right here." Your permits, your stall, gone. The crowd stirred uneasily, sensing that the confrontation was about to boil over. People pulled out their phones to record the encounter. The presence of cameras made the cop hesitate for the first time, though only slightly. He wasn't used to being watched, and the awareness gnawed at him. The vendor's voice remained calm. Officer, I understand your position. But extorting me isn't the way to resolve anything. Surely, we can find a better solution. He continued arranging his fruits and vegetables, making the motion appear casual, almost mundane. A subtle shift occurred. The cop noticed something in the vendor's movement. He stiffened for a fraction of a second but quickly dismissed it. Stop stalling. I don't have time for this, he barked. Sweat glistened on his forehead, a rare sign of unease. Then the vendor made a deliberate move, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, a quick glance toward a narrow alley, followed by a barely noticeable nod. At the same time, the vendor's earpiece transmitted a discreet signal to a nearby federal unit. The cop didn't notice, yet his intuition prickled. Something was off. You're hiding something, the officer spat, his voice lowering into a dangerous growl. I know you are. Hand it over, now. The vendor's calm smile widened just slightly. No, officer. I think it's time we let the truth speak for itself. At that moment, one of the nearby vendors whispered, Look at him, he's not afraid. Others noticed, whispering among themselves. The crowd's energy shifted, the atmosphere became electric with anticipation. Everyone knew something major was about to happen, though no one could predict the magnitude. The cop's frustration boiled over. You think you can play me? I run this street. He stepped fully in front of the stall, attempting to intimidate the vendor and the crowd. But the calm, measured posture of the vendor countered his aggression like an invisible shield. Suddenly, the crowd's attention snapped to the alley. Several unmarked vehicles quietly rolled into position. The officer's confidence faltered as he finally sensed the presence of others, though he couldn't yet identify them. The vendor continued speaking, keeping his voice steady. Officer, sometimes the strongest force isn't money, it's truth. The words seemed to hang in the air like a warning. The officer, already unnerved, tried to regain dominance. I don't know what you mean, I run this block. But his proclamation fell flat. The streets had shifted, the power dynamic had subtly changed. The vendor's calm defiance, combined with the silent approach of law enforcement, turned every eye toward him. What had begun as a simple extortion attempt had now escalated into a standoff, and the officer's arrogance was about to meet consequences far beyond what he anticipated. Every step he took to assert control only heightened the tension. The crowd leaned in, waiting. Phones were raised, whispers spreading like wildfire. The vendor, still composed, prepared for the moment when he would reveal what the cop could never anticipate, a revelation that would shock everyone on the street and end the officer's career. The cop's voice quivered slightly, though he tried to hide it. I don't know what you mean, he stammered. He had never encountered resistance like this before, calm, measured, and intelligent defiance that didn't bend to intimidation. His confidence was cracking. Then, without warning, the vendor spoke clearly, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. Officer, I think it's time everyone here knows the truth. He reached into his pocket, not for cash, but for an official federal badge. The crowd gasped. Phones that had been recording now zoomed in. People whispered urgently, trying to process what was unfolding. The cop froze. That's impossible, he muttered under his breath. His eyes darted from the badge to the vendor's face, trying to reconcile the polite, unassuming man in front of him with the authority staring back at him. The crowd leaned in closer, anticipation building with every second. The vendor continued, holding the badge up for everyone to see. I am an undercover federal marshal, he announced, his calm demeanor unshaken. And you've just attempted to extort money from a federal officer while on duty. The words hung in the air, heavy with consequence. Shock rippled through the street. Passers-by froze mid-step. Some mouths hung open, others gasped aloud. Even the vendor's neighboring sellers stepped back, unable to believe the reveal. The cop's arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by panic and disbelief. His earlier smirk, the confidence that had radiated control, was gone. The officer stammered, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. Every threat he had issued, every gesture of intimidation, had been meaningless against the man in front of him. His usual tactics of fear and dominance were utterly powerless. The marshal's calm gaze met the officer's, unwavering. "You see, sir, extorting a street vendor is not just corruption, it's a federal offense. And attempting it against an undercover officer is career-ending." The words cut sharper than any weapon. The crowd erupted into murmurs of shock and awe. People who had initially feared the cop now whispered among themselves, some expressing relief, others outrage at the audacity of his actions. "Did he really just?" someone murmured. The officer's colleagues, previously stationed in the cruiser nearby, exchanged tense glances. They realized instantly that their partner's actions had crossed a line, one that could no longer be covered up. The marshal's backup, still discreetly positioned, moved subtly closer, ensuring control over the situation without causing panic. The vendor slowly lowered his badge, now fully visible to the street. "Sometimes, the ones who seem weakest hold the most power," he said calmly. The statement resonated deeply, a reminder that authority isn't always what it seems. For the first time, the cop felt true humiliation. The very people he had sought to intimidate, the vendors, the customers, the neighborhood watchers, were now witnessing his fall. He had demanded money, abused his authority, and in one wrong move, exposed himself to a level of justice he hadn't anticipated. The marshal's revelation also created an immediate ripple effect. Phones captured every detail: the badge, the cop's stunned expression, the stunned crowd. Within hours, the footage would spread, and the officer's actions would be known far beyond the street corner. The power of the reveal was total, social, professional, and legal. The cop tried to regain control, raising his voice and gesturing wildly, but it was futile. His words fell flat, his authority had evaporated. Every gesture now seemed desperate, clumsy, and pitiable. The marshal's calm presence contrasted sharply with the cop's unraveling composure. In that moment, the streets of Fifth Avenue became a stage for justice. What had begun as a routine demand for protection money transformed into a public lesson: arrogance, corruption, and abuse of power would always meet their match. The vendor, humble, composed, and underestimated, had turned the tables in a way no one expected. The twist was complete. The corrupt cop's career, reputation, and control were now in jeopardy, while the marshal's identity and authority had become a symbol of justice in the eyes of every witness on that street. The cop stumbled backward, almost tripping over his own feet. His face, once a mask of arrogance, now revealed panic, fear, and humiliation all at once. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and cameras from smartphones zoomed in on every detail: the badge, the officers shaking hands, the growing sense that he had been thoroughly exposed. The marshal, still calm, stepped forward. "Sir, I am placing you under investigation for attempted extortion, abuse of authority, and misconduct on duty," he stated, his voice measured but firm. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal case." The cop froze, words failing him entirely. The power he had wielded for years, the fear, the intimidation, the ability to demand money from those he considered weaker, evaporated in that single moment. Every vendor, customer, and passerby now saw the full weight of his actions. The humiliation was total. A few backup officers, now moving in to secure the scene, quietly cuffed the officer while he continued to protest, his voice trembling with disbelief. "You don't understand. I was just..." The words fell flat, ignored by the public and even by his fellow officers, who knew their colleague had crossed a line that could no longer be defended. The marshal's calm gaze never wavered. "Your career ends here," he said simply. "Your actions have consequences, not just for you, but for the trust this community places in law enforcement." The crowd erupted, some clapping, others shouting phrases of support for the vendor-turned-marshal. "Finally! Justice," one man yelled. "This is what we needed to see." Another woman whispered to her friend, "I knew something was off, but he handled it perfectly." The energy on the street was electric, fear turned into awe, tension transformed into vindication. Nearby vendors, who had once feared harassment themselves, stepped closer, filming, sharing, and witnessing a public lesson in integrity. The narrative had shifted completely. The officer's attempted intimidation had become a cautionary tale, recorded and documented by dozens of witnesses and countless smartphones. The marshal turned back to his stall, now more than just a roadside business, a symbol of resilience and hidden power. "It's important for everyone to remember," he said, addressing the crowd, "corruption cannot stand against truth, courage, and vigilance. No matter how small or seemingly powerless, integrity has weight. And sometimes, the person you least expect is the one who enforces it." Meanwhile, the arrested officer was led to the unmarked vehicle, protests falling on deaf ears. His colleagues looked on with a mixture of shock and relief. The man who had once wielded fear like a weapon was now exposed, powerless, and completely at the mercy of both the law and public scrutiny. The crowd slowly dispersed, many stopping to take one last glance at the scene. Smartphones continued to record, live streams spread across social media, and hashtags praising justice began trending within hours. The story would not remain confined to this street, it would become a viral testament to the power of truth. As the marshal gathered his calm composure, he checked the stall once more. The fruits and vegetables remained neatly stacked, untouched by chaos, a stark contrast to the chaos he had just managed. It was a reminder: courage and strategy can turn even a simple roadside stall into a stage for justice. The cop, now subdued and humiliated, had experienced the full spectrum of consequences, personal, professional, and public. His career, once thought untouchable, was crumbling. And the message was clear to everyone watching: abusing authority, extorting money, and underestimating ordinary people can lead to spectacular, irreversible fallout. In this climax, the justice arc was complete. The corrupt cop faced immediate consequences, the community witnessed accountability firsthand, and the marshal emerged as a symbol of integrity, proving that courage and preparation could overturn even the most entrenched abuse of power. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Cars honked, vendors shouted their prices, and pedestrians moved along, but something had shifted. The tension that had gripped the corner for hours was replaced by a quiet, satisfying sense of justice. People whispered among themselves, recounting the dramatic reveal, the marshal's calm authority, and the cop's total humiliation. The vendor, now fully recognized as an undercover federal marshal, resumed his stall with effortless composure. He smiled politely at a few regular customers, greeting them as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet the air around him was charged, a quiet reminder that courage and integrity could turn the tide against corruption. Neighbors and onlookers lingered, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the cop's fall, others expressing gratitude to the marshal for upholding justice in such a public, undeniable way. Phones were still recording. The videos would spread across social media, serving as a lasting lesson. Justice, it seemed, had a megaphone now. The cop, led away in cuffs, cast one last glance at the marshal and the crowd. His face reflected the weight of failure, arrogance replaced by regret, and authority replaced by vulnerability. It was a humbling moment, one that would follow him long after the street emptied. He had underestimated the calm, the composure, and the hidden strength of someone he thought powerless. For the marshal, the experience reinforced a simple truth: appearances can be deceiving, and justice often comes from those least expected. He continued to interact with the neighborhood respectfully, maintaining the same warmth and humility he had shown throughout the ordeal. It was not just about catching a corrupt officer, it was about showing the community that courage, planning, and moral conviction could protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. As the sun climbed higher, the street returned to its ordinary pace. But the story lingered, in whispers, in recordings, and in the minds of every witness. It became a symbol of hope and empowerment, a reminder that no act of corruption is beyond exposure, no abuse of power is permanent, and ordinary people, armed with truth and courage, could shift the balance of justice. The stall, once just a small roadside business, now symbolized resilience. The marshal had turned a moment of intimidation into a lesson for everyone, a lesson that would resonate long after the day was done. And as the community resumed its daily life, they carried with them a renewed sense of vigilance, knowing that justice, though sometimes hidden, always finds its way to the light.